to begin by saying I'm not really talking about something about which I'm an academic expert. I'm talking from the background or point of view of just being a Palestinian Jerusalemite, and from the point of view of having lived here for most of my life. And thirdly, I want to just add that I'm 1 year younger, in fact, than the State of Israel. So it's been a long life, but a very sort of relevant one. So the one thing I want to say in relation to the future is that in especially in the context of what we've gone through the past 2 years, I won't give it a name, but however you name it, let me say the grotesque horrors we've seen over the past 2 years. Um, my first comment is that I don't actually, at the moment, foresee that the end of conflict is going, or that the conflict is going to be resolved, or that it will be subsiding in the near future. So what we have going on today, I believe, is not going to take us very far in addressing the root problem at home here. Now, the second comment I want to make is that perhaps my first comment has to do really with the nature of the conflict here. The nature of the conflict here being, as I see it, a conflict between one side, namely let me call it the Jewish side, becoming more and more ethnocentered and more out to basically retain control over the entire territory of Palestine, that's Israel, plus the West Bank, plus Gaza, retain this territory under its control. This has not always been the case that Israel or that Zionism was like this, but I'm opening this for discussion. And in that context, therefore, I don't see the conflict, in fact, resolving. Each side, of course, says it wants peace, but each side has its own vision of what that peace looks like. The third thing I want to say is something that bothers me really, and maybe, through the discussion, um, you may enlighten me about this. I can't enlighten you. Whether the nature of Zionism, it's the DNA of Zionism, to be going in the direction it's been going in particular in the past, say, 10 or 20 years. In other words, whether Zionism is by nature, by some essential property inside it or of it, in it, uh, 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 an ideology that cannot stop at any one point before, in fact, taking over the entire territory. Now, if this is the case, then that would explain why I say the conflict is not one that one can envisage, one that can be solved. Today we have, I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe something like maybe 7 million Jews, 7 million non-Jews, Arabs, Palestinians, if you call them, in the territory between the river and the sea. And in a context in which this kind of extremist messianism that has manifested itself more and more in the past 10, 15 years in Israel, it is very hard to see how, in fact, the problem between the Jewish ethos here, or the Messianic ethos here, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the vibrant Palestinian indigenous population, how these can actually somehow see eye to eye with one another at any one point, and in what way. And this leads me, in fact, to make my maybe last comment at this point, which is just to raise the question, in fact, and it's one that I am not, I didn't come up with it. I've seen it, in fact, being brought up by various Israelis, in fact, here and there, people I know, who have in who have argued for a kind of separation between Israel and Israeli nationalism, if you like, on the one hand, and this part that has accompanied the creation and the birth and the life of Israel so far, which is expansionist Zionism. Because if this can be done, if one could separate between these two, perhaps then one could think that it is possible to think about a future in which either we have two states or one state, or in which there's some confederation between states or what have you. But anyway, a future in which people, both Jews and non-Jews, Arabs, Palestinians, can all enjoy their freedoms on the one hand, and between whom Israelis and Palestinians, or Jews and non-Jews, there should be equality between all. Now, it seems to me that, what I just said at the end is probably the basic principle that must underline any kind of real peace between the two sides. One last thing I want to add, so that I'm not totally misunderstood here, is the following, that in fact, there was a time, I believe, back in the late 80s, early 90s, when it looked like Zionism and Palestinian nationalism could be reconciled with one another in the context of two states. At least there was sufficient support in the two populations for that kind of outcome. But unfortunately, that fell through, and since then, things have been going from bad to worse. Neither on the side of the Palestinian Authority has the authority been able to move forward towards making that peace real, the two-state solution through negotiations. And on the other side, in Gaza, as we saw, I mean, there was this the March of Return several years ago, when no violence was used by the Palestinians coming up to the borders with Israel, but basically peacefully, and in fact, being shot at by the Israeli army. And that was a few years ago, but I think it gave a lesson to people in Gaza, or to the leadership there, that the only way to go forward is the use of force, unfortunately, leading to what happened on a couple of years ago. I'll stop here, and I'll open. I'm ready to respond, or to, if you have sort of ways to enlighten me about what is happening, what I'm living in. And I'm very serious about really feeling very, very lost at this point in time, having gone through all these years trying to participate in making peace happen, but it hasn't happened yet, and it doesn't look like the chances are that it will. I'll stop here. Thomas, I think you have probably more questions and critiques than I have of myself, so please take
I've
over.
got many questions, but I think one thing we could start with perhaps is if you say a little bit about your current situation, and because you are in Jerusalem on the Israeli side of things, as I understand it. And what has it been like living through the last 2 years there where you are, and with people who are in the same sort of position as you are?
Well, just as a kind of clarification, I live in East Jerusalem.
Mhm.
I live in East Jerusalem, which actually was until 1967 part and parcel of the West Bank that was conquered by Israel. And in 1967, when East Jerusalem was conquered and the West Bank, what Israel did was to go ahead and annex East Jerusalem, apply its laws to East Jerusalem, in addition to enlarging its territory. So they ate into bits of the West Bank and made that all part of the East Jerusalem to which I belong. But the difference between East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank vis-a-vis Israel is that, in addition to what I just mentioned about laws and annexation, is that there are no borders between where I live next to what used to be the border for 20 years between 48 and 67 and the Israeli side, or the Israeli side of the border, West Jerusalem. Now, it's not been a very nice time, as you may imagine. We haven't been under the same kind of physical, direct pressure that we've seen in other places in the West Bank or in Gaza. But we've been very much part of what's been happening over the past 2 years. You know, I think there's been a lot of pressure on all of us. In Jerusalem, there's been more pressure on the freedoms of the people in East Jerusalem, for instance, you know, being always hunted, if you like, picked out by soldiers or policemen for either having a kufiya or having a necklace around our necks, or going around with phones that have messages about what's going on in the war, showing pictures of the horrors that are taking place in Gaza. I mean, these were all things that were outlawed. And so you could easily be picked up by soldiers or policemen. You could be harassed. You could be, depending on your age and your disposition, you know, all kinds of things might happen to you. But it's generally been much better than the situation in the West Bank, and certainly than the situation in Gaza, which was under direct attack. Now, the other thing is that talking about the West Bank, the rest of the area that was conquered in 67, you must have heard, there's been more and more attacks on villagers, on farmers, on properties, confiscations, developing settlements. As you probably know, we're now in the season when very often there is the olive picking season, when villagers will go out to their olive groves and try to pick their olives. And there's been a lot of attacks on villagers trying to do that, to reap their own olives. The attacks have been by extremist settlers, but they've been supported by the Israeli soldiers around them. So, you know, it's a constant pressure. I don't want to say we've gotten used to it, but it's very depressing situation. Contacts between people on this side and, for instance, Israeli colleagues or friends, we've maintained that to some extent. I've maintained this to some extent, but it's been very much on a low fire. I haven't cut off any kind of relations I've had with Israeli colleagues, but you know, things haven't been normal.
Mhm. And can you say a little bit about the Palestinian side? You spoke about the two sides to the conflict and so on. Is there a Palestinian side that is somewhat organized, that has spokespeople, or I mean, we hear about negotiations with Hamas. We don't hear much about other Palestinian voices that might also be relevant to the
Well,
future of the whole.
the truth is, I feel that the Palestinian side is very scattered, never been so scattered
Mhm.
as now. As you know, we have the PA on the one hand in Ramallah, and the PA basically stands for negotiating with Israel for a two-state solution. That's what it stands for, through peaceful means, non-violent means. But, you know, it's not really brought any kind of settlement. It hasn't succeeded in those negotiations over the past 20 years. We haven't moved forward. So Palestinians basically look upon the whole process of negotiations to be a total waste of time, or have come to see this. They also see the authority itself as, you know, you hear people say that it's corrupt. You hear people say it's ineffective. It hasn't been elected for I don't know how many years. So there's all that on the Palestinian side with or vis-a-vis the authority in Ramallah. And in Gaza, of course, Hamas has been in charge for I don't know how long, since the most recent elections more than 15 years ago. And they are now also, I think, in a scattered situation. I mean, I don't think they're as popular within Gaza as they used to be earlier, or at least that their philosophy, if you like, is not as popular or ideology as it was before. Um, Factions representing different bits and pieces of the Palestinian landscape are trying to get together. But they've tried this for many years and they've never succeeded. The most recent attempt we heard of was a meeting in Cairo a few days ago, where the representatives of pro-Palestinian Authority Fatah faction and other factions, from the right or from the left, all met in Cairo with the parties that are trying to put something together. They've come out with consensus, with a conclusion that they want to go ahead with what is essentially the basic elements contained in the Trump plan, namely, we want to give over the authority over Gaza to to a new leadership, a technocratic leadership that will control the transitional period that's expected ahead, the period in which things will happen to within Gaza. Uh, Basically, people, Hamas giving up its arms, subsistence food and so on coming in, looking after the children, looking after the people's homes, looking after everything, education, you name it, building things up. So, there's this kind of attitude that we want to do this, but it's very fragile, all of it. And it's very fragile given the fact that Israel still controls, I think about 45 or whatever percent of Gaza. It hasn't actually withdrawn its forces. And the Americans are now, Trump is trying to make sure that the ceasefire he worked out will not collapse. So he's there. The Americans are there to make sure this phase of the ceasefire at least will succeed. It might well do for some time, but underneath it or beyond it, as I was saying earlier, the Palestinian people at present are all over the place. They're not totally united with one another. But in terms of formal representation, of course, the PA, the Palestinian Authority, is the authority that formally, that internationally represents us. And behind it, the PLO, as you probably know, is the formal authority that represents us. But and hopefully, that authority will continue to be in control, will take things over at some point, that there'll be some kind of reconstruction of it, a reconstruction of the PA itself, of the authority, in such a way as to bring in all the different attitudes, factions of society, of the population. But it's so difficult and far-fetched at the moment. I don't see this happening. And anything can just blow everything up at the moment.
Mhm. Yeah. I have two more things that I wanted to raise, and I hope that there are other questions from the audience. One is there is a lot of discussion about whether the Hamas attack of October 2023, whether that was something that was known by the Israelis beforehand. And there seems to be a lot of evidence to that effect. Is there any insight that you have into that question beyond what is being debated?
I don't actually have access to any information of that kind,
Mhm.
except what one reads in the papers, and there have been people that have said that Israel had knowledge. But as you probably know, there's a kind of difference between of knowing, if you
Mhm.
like. I mean, some people in the army, some people somewhere, might have had, knowledge that there are some things that are happening, but then did not take that seriously enough, for instance. Um, so they didn't know in the full sense of the word that the movements and so on were really serious and that Hamas was intending to. So that's possible. I can't really believe that Israel just allowed, or people in Israel who were in charge just allowed um, what happened to have taken place. I mean, the people who claim this, of course, say that they did this in order to maintain the government, or to make the government find ways to maintain its authority over the Netanyahu was in a bad state, still is.
Right. Yeah.
It's possible, but I don't have any access to intelligence information.
Okay. I mean, the two things that are cited here are the statement by the wife of the Army Chief of Staff, who's said in an interview that when her husband left home that morning, he said, "This is the day when we get rid of the Gaza problem for good." And the other is that the Golani Brigade was told to stand down during the morning of the day of the attack. And they were given 3 hours in which they were supposed to not patrol the area. Anyway,
That's scary what you're saying, but anyway, yeah, as you
yeah,
say.
the other thing I wanted to ask you is how much communication is there, sort of apart from the leadership level, between the West Bank Palestinians and you and the Gaza Palestinians? Are there? Can you communicate? You can't travel there, right? Do you have open communications to the two sides? How much can the two sides, West Bank and Gaza, communicate with each other? Ordinary people, how much can they how much of a Palestine is really left a united Palestine?
Yeah, you're right. It's a good question. First of all, when Hamas took over, uh, after in the elections, and I think it was 2015 or thereabouts, the borders were totally closed off. Gaza became an isolated territory, isolated from the people in the West Bank or from East Jerusalem. And so, for instance, talking about myself, I haven't been to Gaza at all, and not only just myself, but Palestinians from Jerusalem in general and the West Bank have not actually been able to visit Gaza. People in Gaza, some of them who would leave Gaza, go out to Egypt, for instance, might come round through Jordan and come to Ramallah, where the PA is. And there have been some of them that have done that. Most recent example is Nasser al-Qudwe, who used to be a member and returned to become a member of the Fatah Central Committee. He's the person that's been appearing with Ehud Ulmert in different platforms to talk about the two-state solution and peace. Because he came out from Gaza, he went to, I think, Egypt, France, then came back to the West Bank. But these are exceptions. Now, having said this, well, just in addition to this, as far as we are concerned in East Jerusalem, we have access to the West Bank. Of course, we can visit the West Bank. The people from the West Bank cannot easily visit us, so we can visit them. But there are so many um, checkpoints now surrounding a lot of the villages and towns in the West Bank that actually it's very hard to get to anywhere in one day and come back. And it's very hard even for people within the West Bank to go through the roadblocks and so on to get from one town or village to another. So communication has been at that level, physical communication has been very difficult. Now, of course, telephones, media, of course, have been open. So people have been able to talk on the phone with each other or send messages, emails, and so on with one another. I want to just emphasize here that I don't want maybe people, sitting over there may think that the people in Gaza are different from the people in the West Bank and different from the people in Jerusalem, and also different, say, even from the Palestinians within Israel who are Israelis. But The fact is that a lot of us are actually intermarried with the people in with Gaza. I mean, a lot of people here. My case is one example. On my mother's side of the family, they are Gaza people, and so we've been, worried about what was happening to my side of my mother's side of the family, and it's the same with other people. So there's been contact over the phone, and we've actually been sharing the pain, the horror, the difficulty of living this war with the people in Gaza, not only in theoretic terms, but also in direct terms, as affecting people that are close to us by blood.
Okay, we have a question from R. Ali. Can you unmute yourself?
Hello, Professor Park. This is Ramsha. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm so sorry I've joined the conversation a bit late. But I definitely have a question that was going on in my mind since a very long time period, and it seems like an excellent platform to address that. Now that the most of us already know about the Gaza problem, the Palestinian-Israel conflict, and I guess there has been tons of volumes of awareness about the conflict itself, the root causes and everything. I want to know that there has been a discussion among the intellectuals that the two-state solution is no more a tangible solution to resolve the conflict. I wanted to know if the two-state solution is no more possible, is there a tangible solution inside at the moment? Or as Professor Park just mentioned, that some of the people are saying they have gotten rid of the Gaza problem. It's discarded in the power lobbies already and would just lead to more build-up frustrations in the activists and people who want a tangible solution for the conflict. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I think there are a lot of Palestinians and Israelis, in fact, wondering about, the whole business about peace and whether the only way to get there, if it's a two-state solution or not. One of the problems about a two-state solution, of course, is a practical problem, namely the fact that over the past, all the years of the occupation, but in particular the last 10, 20, 30 years, the profile of the West Bank in particular has actually changed. So, for instance, there are probably close, I would say, to 1 million Israeli settlers living in East Jerusalem and the West Bank, in a population that's, maybe about 4 million Palestinians. So already you have a very large population of Israelis living on this side of the green border, that's to say in the 67 area. The infrastructure, the confiscations, the settlements that have taken place over all those years makes it very hard now for even the most imaginative of us to see how one can draw the picture, the plan or map for two states, two separate states. So that's a physical problem. But then there's another problem. And the other problem is this, which I mentioned right at the beginning of talking, which is whether in fact the readiness in the first place exists specifically on the Israeli side to reach such a solution with the Palestinians, or indeed any solution in which the principles that will govern such a solution are those to do with the freedoms for all and equality between all. I mean, this is a different problem. It's to do with ideology, and in particular with how Zionism has more and more come to express itself in its position with regard to Palestinians. Now, if that is the case, and therefore will continue to be the case, then of course, not only is it difficult to envisage a two-state solution, it's difficult to envisage, a one democratic state solution in the near future. Let me put it this way. One would have to think about such a solution, if it ever comes about, in the very long distant future, and requiring a lot of, as you put it, discussion between people that are seriously care about ourselves and our neighbors, the two populations, who really seriously care about how the future generations will be living here. Because if there's no chance, for instance, of this extremist messianism disappearing, and no chance of people who are now Israeli Zionists becoming open to the idea of somehow dividing up the rights here, whether territorially or in terms of individuals, between Israelis and Palestinians. If that isn't going to happen, then I think, as I said earlier at the beginning, I think we're still in for a very, very long and difficult confrontation between each other. I think the more Israelis thinking about the possible peaceful one state, the more Palestinians thinking about that and talking about it. But, there's also the immediate need or needs that both societies want. I don't think either society really wants to go on shedding blood. It's not a normal situation. So I hope there will be some peace in which people, intellectuals on either side or intellectuals together on both sides, will sit together and think again of how the future should look like, so that we can all live a peaceful and dignified life and fulfilling, satisfactory life.
Good. We have Anat Biletsky and Christopher Ngozi.
Hi, thanks a lot. Thanks, Sari. You've always been between the two of us, the optimist. I have been despairing for many years, but now the despair has taken over completely with what you might call the radical left or whatever, even though people are still doing things, as you say. And it's good to hear you thinking that maybe there could be a real dialogue and real cooperation. But I did want to just add one more point here, which is perhaps one of the reasons for the despair, and that's the word and the practice of genocide. There is something intolerable and inconceivable in realizing that one's own side is engaged in genocide. And what we're seeing on the Israeli side, with very, very crazy numbers. I mean, this is in the 80 and 90% high line, that Israelis do not care or do not talk or do not know about what is really going on in Gaza. I have so many friends who would call themselves leftists, but they'll say things like, oh, there's so much pain for my side that I can't now even think of the other side. Things like that, which are cliches almost. But this is the general Israeli way of looking at things. You said before something about seeing things on TV. So Al Jazeera is forbidden in Israel, but any Israeli could have opened up CNN, BBC. I mean, you could know what's going on out there. And there is a complete denial. You might call it a psychological denial, except for the ideology, of course, but there's a denial that the Israeli side, that our side could be engaged in genocide. So that almost doesn't exist. Or think of last week when the hostages came back, and I don't put that down, the joy there or the terrible suffering before, but at the same time, there were over 1,000 Palestinians who came back. You didn't see that on Israeli television. It was not part of the conversation, of the discourse at all. So there's something that my good friend Anat Matar, who is very, very devoted to this cause of what you're saying, living together, one state, one confederation, doesn't matter what you call it, but Anat Matar, who's active in being a real dialogue setting person with Palestine, used the word just last week, narcissism. She said that the Israeli side is a narcissistic society, and that's an interesting concept. It doesn't come up usually when you talk about real political dialogue, but that's what we saw is Israelis have come into, and this is all Israelis, as I say, 80 to 90%, where it is all about us, about what Israel is suffering from and what Israel is doing. And the concept of genocide, not to mention the real practice of genocide, Israelis think this is far-fetched. They don't know why we're even using that word. They're certainly denying that it's genocide, whereas people who are working or who have some sort of connection with a real connection with what's going on in Israel. And Alex DeWall, who works on famine all over the world, comes to mind. He's written about this. Omer Bartov. These are people in the United States, obviously, working on these things. When I talk to them, I have this feeling they don't believe that this is going on, but they can't deny it. So when you talk about the two sides somehow talking together, I see that as a dream. And it's not that I want to get everybody here in a state of deep despair. I'm just sort of reporting on deep despair that is deeply ingrained there now on what you might call the radical left or those in Israel who think like you, and you've never claimed to be radical left, but you have been the reasonable voice in this conversation. And I wonder how you keep reasonable and not drop deep into despair.
Anat, thank you
Sorry
very
about
much.
all of that.
No, not at all. Look, I think what you said, all that you said is true. I mean, I can't disagree with what you said. There's a lot of despair at the moment, and it affects me as it affects you. But I actually still, I don't know, I'm a born optimist, as you said. So I'm still hoping that over time, and I don't say, tomorrow or the day after, uh, I believe that things, will have to be worked on, of course, to change, and maybe we can make them change. Since the alternative is really horrible. I mean, if you think that we're not going to get there, then we're looking at the apocalypse or something. And I don't want us to get there. And so one has to keep up the hope that to work towards something, realizing that it will take time, a long time perhaps. Now, there are many Israelis. I know you mentioned some, but I mean, did you, for instance, look or see the statement that was actually produced the other day, I think, by Peter Beinart and a very good friend of mine, Avram Burg, uh, who is very sort of outspoken and has been out in
Right.
demonstrations and has, I mean, I think that kind of Israeli, whether he's left or right, but what I would call a human being, a proper human being, I still believe in the existence of such people. And I see them, I mean, here, I see them in direct interaction and that, whether I'm going into a hospital or into a bus or, coming across someone. I mean, yes, there are a lot of horrible people around, but there are some who are actually normal. And I think we just have to work together to make sure that it is the normal people, normal human beings who, at the end of the day, will be the winners in this. Because as I said, the alternative is too crazy, too dangerous to leave. And if you go back to the 80s, 90s, neither the Israeli people nor the Palestinian people started out wanting two states side by side, for instance. We wanted it all without the Israelis, probably, and the Israelis wanted it all without the Palestinians, probably. But then there's a lot of work done. And, at some point, there was a critical mass of the population on the Israeli side as well as on the Palestinian side to try that peace experiment. I mean, there was some kind of, now it didn't work. We should just learn from that experience and see how things can work for the future, whatever it is, however it is. I don't have a kind of, I'm no longer a big fan of a Palestinian state. By the way, I never was, although I'm not a radical left, but, I've never really, been a big fan of, but I went along with the two states because it seemed to me to be a logical thing Palestinians, Israelis wanted. But, everything, human beings can find ways to live with one another. And we just have to work towards getting there. So don't lose all out hope. Keep working on it.
Last question from Christopher Ngosa, and then we go on to Isabel Ortiz, who has already joined us. Christopher.
Okay. How is everyone doing?
All good.
Okay, this is Christopher Ngosa from Zambia. My question is a quick one. From the presentation, I've been trying to follow the war, what's happening, Israel and Pakistan. My question is twofold. Is the war politically motivated or it is religiously motivated? What's the actual cause?
Is it politically or what?
Is it politically motivated or religiously motivated? What's the actual cause?
I still didn't get the second one.
Religiously motivated.
Religious. I see. Yeah, I see. Sorry. I think by now it's both, actually, at least from the Israeli side, mostly. I think that on the Palestinian side, although of course Hamas now is in the forefront of the Palestinian, say, resistance movement, the Palestinian people do not have the same kind of religious fundamentalist ideology that, for instance, Hamas itself has, or that, for instance, on the Israeli side, now, unfortunately, the majority of Israelis have. But since it is there, this religiosity on the Israeli side, then it becomes religious in a way. But it's basically a conflict, I think. Maybe Anat can correct us, but I think it's from the Israeli messianic side, it's the fight to take over the entire country and to get rid of as many Palestinians as possible. Or if not to get rid of them, but to sort of subdue them, put them under the boots of the conqueror. This is what it is. And on the Palestinian side, it's resistance to this. It's very simple, very straightforward.
I could just add to that, Thomas, can I just butt in just for 1
Yes.
minute? On the Israeli side, what we are seeing is just a great growth of, you called it messianic before, but it's just religiosity. It doesn't have to be messianic. The army used to have 1% of the officers religious, whether it's the small kippah or the big kippah or the fundamentalists. It used to be 1% of army officers. Now over 50% are religious. So the country itself has become much more religious. It doesn't have to be what we used to call extreme messianic Jews that were mostly in Jerusalem. It's all over the schools. Last year, even not this year, last year, first graders, over 60% of first graders were in religious schools. So there is something in the whole society that has become much more religious. There are secular people, of course, there are many of them, but Zionism has become, in a sense, a religion. So it's hard to, I think, even analyze exactly what we're talking about when you ask about a society and its religious background and roots and whatever. But it's worse than it was, certainly worse even than, well, I shouldn't say worse because some people might think that it's okay to have a religious society, but it's more religious than it was in 48, in 67, even in the 80s and 90s when you're talking about. So this is something that has changed sociologically in the Israeli psyche, and that's a very different discussion, but it's taken over the military discussion.
Yeah, and it's a religion of aggrandizement. I mean, this is what I mean. Forget about calling it messianic, but it's a religion that is actually pushing Israeli society towards taking everything under its wing. Anyway.